Well, there's a problem. We don't want to reject people. On the other hand, there is a cost in being in bad company. What do we do about that? Well, the story of Jesus is very much that I am come that they might have life and have it more abundantly. First of all, I think that it must be the case that we thank God for the difficult person. And by difficult, I mean the one that really is pretty destructive. Now, there are limits, and we don't want to feed the opportunity for their destruction. We are not fodder for them to practice bad things on. And we are there to bring life. And it helps if you visualize them as God sees them in eternity, which is fully adult members of heavenly host, and therefore they are in some sense children of God now, and He has provided for them every detail of their life made possible by God. And He doesn't just ignore them, He works on their welfare. It is as well to remember, though, that He doesn't do it too blatantly. In fact, for much of mankind, they spend most of their life not terribly conscious of God at all. And yet, everything they do is utterly dependent on His provision, His care, His loving kindness. So, with difficult people, first of all, we watch the situation. We remind ourselves that this is someone God has cared for and provided for, and they may be being destructive at the minute. We move out of the way of their destruction, of course, but we don't harm them in any way. We don't reject them. We can't be much of their life if they're not seeking God, because God is everything to us. But we can be helpful and kind, not distant and critical, and most of all not reacting to their less than godly ways, but rather conscious of the fact that we are there to bring the kingdom of heaven closer at hand for them. I'm reminded of one of the yogis, saints, if you like, in the autobiography referred to by Paramahansa, and he only came out of his house on very rare occasions, national religious celebration, and even then he'd only come as far as the front gate. And the reason was for his seclusion, when asked, was that he does it not for his own sake, being secluded, but for the world's. By which I think he meant that, his godliness was so foreign to worldly people that His presence wouldn't be a blessing to them. Don't leave yourself in the presence of someone you're not being a blessing to. Do you see, you might be intent on blessing them, but they're just finding you infuriating, quite contrary to the company that they want. So it's best to keep out of their way. There's a little contact, and that contact might be quite difficult, quite sticky, and because you care for them, you'll try and do the best in the situation, dodge a few of the arrows that they may fire at you, and shield yourself, and, well, be polite but retiring. That may be necessary, you see, the retiring bit. But we are in the world. Well, it's written that God does a greater thing through us than in us than through us. He does a greater thing in us than through us. So we hold our peace and our separateness because we are not of the world. But we are of an eternity that the world is for. You know, an eternity of heaven, whereas the world is transitory. And we're here to help, such as want our help. No more than that. We're not here to get annoyed or frustrated by their presence, and you can retire much. You need to have some difficulties there, because that's what's training us. It's what's helping us to mature. Coping with difficult situations at times, conscious of God, trusting Him, and with good reason to trust, thanking Him for the difficulty, seeking earnestly what He's revealing in our own character that we can improve. Doesn't sound very exciting, does it? But in fact it's quite lovely, and life can unfold with an assurance of the sheer goodness of God and His provision and His loving kindness. And our difficulties have meaning and are a blessing. Yes, I'm reminded we're not principally here to help others. We're principally here as children learning to become wonderful, spiritual, heavenly adults. And in that, we're also interacting with other people who are also here for that purpose. So we contribute to that purpose all we can, and that is the godliness. We don't necessarily contribute towards what they want, because much of what they want is not godly. But the things that are godly, we encourage. But what I want to say is that God is not using us He is not saying, I need you to do this for others, or for the church, or whatever. On the contrary, he takes you very deliberately into situations that are going to be a blessing to you. Do you see, it's like if I need an accountant and you come to me as an accountant, I don't necessarily use you as an accountant, because what you really need is some help spiritually in some other occupation, pastime, relationship. In other words, I don't use you. Someone comes who needs to be an accountant, well, that's different. Because it's good to meet a spiritual need, and in some sense, we're assuming that accountancy is a necessary thing towards some spiritual future, which of course doesn't seem too likely to me, but it could be, couldn't it? But the essential thing is not that I need an accountant, but that you need to be an accountant for some reason. And if you have this great ability and specialism of being an accountant, and I need one, but that's not what's best for your future, then what we should really be focusing on, and using you for, so to speak, not using at all, is finding you a niche that achieves that future and what you truly need, which might not be continuing your occupation as an accountant, even though you're good at it and even though I need it. Do you see, I'm fundamentally considering the alternative to trade, which is not doing something because it's an advantage to me, but doing something because it's right with God. In this sense, we're thinking of, it's a blessing for you, then we should do it for you. If it's just a blessing for me, but a cost to you, that's, I should not use you. On the contrary, I should be thinking, what's best for this person? What can I do to help their life? So, in some sense then, if I have a need, I go out and look for someone who has a need to meet that need of mine. I don't just, for instance, look for someone to be in love with. I look for someone who has a need to be in love with me. I have a need, and I look for someone else who has a need. Now you could think of that as a perfect trade, but I'm not going to use the other person. There's no point in having someone because you love them, but you are not meeting their need. That's not kind. Let us instead find someone who has a need to love you. And then you'll both be happy. Remember though, don't be with them simply because they have a need to love you. For God can meet that need without sacrificing you, in the sense that there's no good for you in that person being with you. hang on, is that very selfish? Let's think about this. What I'm thinking of is specifically, who should I be in the company of? Who should I spend time with? What's the ideal? The ideal is it's a blessing to both of us. Okay, what about where it's a blessing to them, but a great cost to me? Now that's the way the Christian story has come to be understood by Christians. You know, that Jesus suffers greatly and we gain enormously. You know, that's not quite the right story or quite right interpretation, is it? Because how can I be happy that I've gained so much but at great cost to the one person I don't want to harm because they've been so good to me? You could say, well, you'll be overcome by gratitude, won't you? Yes, that's true. But then they'll love me instead of God. And it's God to whom they should really be in gratitude to. And the Christian solution has been, oh, well, we'll make Jesus God. If Jesus is God, then we're all right in being overwhelmed gratitude towards Jesus for his sacrifice and his suffering. That might sound like a good argument, but I don't want God to suffer. I don't want God to suffer any more than I want Jesus to suffer, or anyone else's purpose to be loving and kind to me. What I'm saying is that's not my ideal situation, where the one that's kind to me can only do it through great pain and suffering. Right. We are available then to people to give them goodness if we can. And if they are not available to receive the goodness, but wish to continue in their present desires and goals and purposes and ways of living, then we don't get in their way. And our company is in their way. They'll know of you, that you're different, that you have what you think of as a way to God, which they are not interested in, or think you're completely deceived and deluded. But if they really want to come to God, and their way of life might in the end bring them to that desire, then they'll know who to come to. Until then, you're best with some distance. And if you think of it, the world is such that you can constantly increase distance from whoever is not harmonious with you. And you can do that without being unkind or rude. On the contrary, I mean, your distancing is being kind to them. Of course, they may well want you for other purposes, to be cannon fodder, target practice and so on. Well, really not much point in hanging around for that, is there? They'll get enough knowledge of your existence, that you're on the menu for godliness, and that until you choose godliness, you're really not available. Until they choose godliness, you are not available. So, we don't actually fellowship with the ungodly. They know we will help if it's consistent with godliness. And when they're in distress, they may well turn to us. And because they're in distress and they're turning to us, they'll be much more receptive to goodness. And you'll find, at least while they're in the distress, that there is a harmony in relating to them, and you can help. But until then, you probably can't help. Because from their point of view, what you see as help is no blessing at all, from their point of view. They're not seeking after godliness. They're seeking after all sorts of, if you like, worldly transitory goals that only bring unhappiness. And they don't fully appreciate that yet, until they've suffered in the consequences of it long enough. So don't deliberately fellowship with the ungodly. Fellowship with those that are seeking. That might be a very ungodly person who is seeking. Ah, no, that's different. He may well have ears to hear. And it's worth a bit of cost and help to bless him. It's more than worth it, isn't it? It's absolutely a joy to do. Because he's inquiring, he's seeking. He may be afar off, but he's facing the right direction. Lovely. But in general, you can enjoy and rejoice in the company of the godly. And you'll gravitate to them and them to you. And don't wreck it by frittering away time with people that you're not being a blessing to and are not rejoicing in your company, but on the contrary are critical, dismissive, accusatory. Well, I'm not going to list a lot of negatives, but you know what I mean. Thank you, Heavenly Father. Well, it's important to remember also that even the most difficult person can at times be relating very well. So make the best of that. Don't shy away from them out of habit because they're labelled in your mind as someone who is not seeking. People go up and down. They're a kaleidoscope of personalities. And if you're being presented with a friendly, open, cooperative, pleasant personality, albeit rather surprisingly given your experience of them, well, this is a lovely opportunity to just build and encourage and love and delight on and bless. And, of course, if it does turn sour again and in come all the arrows and criticisms and negativities, then, no, time to back off, time to go. It doesn't mean to say it was a waste of time what you did. On the contrary, you've given a good experience, a good relationship experience in their life, albeit for a little while perhaps, but something to compare good to bad. People need to know what's on the menu, what they can choose. And then they can make a better choice because they have experienced your good company when they were open to it for whatever reason. Might be great distress and great need, so they're relating well. Thank you. Bye.